Hello, everyone. Welcome to our online video series, Reading Hope in Trying Times. Our guest today is Lesa Engelthaler. Lesa is a senior associate for Victory Search Group, assisting nonprofits to recruit executive leaders. Lesa is also a writer for such publications as the Dallas Morning News and Christianity Today. Her friends would say that Lesa is passionate about empowering women. Therefore, most recently, she is proud to serve on the board of Inc., a women's writing and speaking collective, and the Economic Security Grants Review Committee for the Texas Women's Foundation. Previously, Lesa served on the board of Missio Alliance, concentrating on women's efforts there. After leading an annual trip to Nicaragua for several years to partner with the House of Hope, a nonprofit helping women escape prostitution, Lesa was delighted to join that board. Today, Lesa is working on her first children's book in hopes of empowering girls everywhere, and in particular, her granddaughters, Lucy, Jane, and Lemon. So we're really glad to have Lesa here with us today. Welcome, Lesa.
Thank you, Brian. So excited to be here today and to be thinking of hanging out with other writers, and that's just making my day in the midst of the quarantine.
Well, as we spoke before getting on the recording here, we were both going to be at the Festival of Faith and Writing this week. So unfortunately, that's not happening, but at least we get to spend some time together here.
I agree. Yeah, that's a good way to think of that. And yes, yeah. It's really encouraging to be with you.
So perhaps you can start by just sharing some of your thoughts on this whole global health crisis that we're going through.
It's just, at first I didn't like the word unprecedented. I was like, that's for really big things, so let's not overuse that word. And I find myself, in week 5, of being home with the permission to use that word, about this time. And so I think I was just, I know that I'm privileged. I do have a kind of makeshift office in my home, and, there's so many people that don't have things like that. So working from home and lots of Zooming like, we're doing right here. So very grateful, during it.
Yeah, have you been able to stay in touch with some of your writer friends?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's what one of the great things about it is that we are stuck at home, and so we are remembering, the people that we love, and exchange some things with Parker Palmer that I know that you're going to have on a little bit later, and just, checking on people that you love and in the busy time you don't check on. And so that's been a huge joy, to check on people. Absolutely.
So I know some of the writers that I've spoken with, have said that, oh, wow, this is great because I don't have to go to all these conferences. I'll have a lot more time to write. and other writers that I have talked to are basically frozen right now. They may have the time or they may not have the time if they have small children that they're trying to take care of at home while, they do a full-time job at home or things like that. Or they may just be frozen just because of the emotions around this. So kind of where are you at these days?
Yeah, I was thinking that was such a great question to think of. And I vacillate between the people that you've talked to of feeling so anxious. The anxiety is so high that the thought of putting, 3 words together is overwhelming, so the writing is difficult. And then the other night I stayed up way past midnight, on just a tear of writing, and it felt so good. And it felt like it was in a, kind of a getting out of things out of me. I thought about, what has been your question of what has getting you through it. I'm an Enneagram 1, so I want to improve things. I want to do things. So for me, it is writing, either to inform other people, to give other people hope. So I was able to kind of pull it together and write. And I wrote about just an interesting observation on the word shelter. And so I wrote for a magazine and a place that I used to be on the board, Missio Alliance. I wrote an article for them. And in fact, it's going to be published soon. So would love to have you put the link to the article, when this goes live.
Yeah, sure. Please send it to me when it's live.
Okay. Yes, I would love it. And it's called Shelter in Place with God. And I wanted to read a little bit from it in trying to maybe give some hope to other people of trying to think about the word shelter, and then the choice of the government's choice of the word shelter and interest, and seeing it on headlines everywhere, shelter in place, sheltering, and so I wanted to read a little bit about, and then the biblical use of the word shelter to represent God. I just found some hope in that and thought
Good.
that might share some others. So
that'd be wonderful. Yeah, please.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks. Yeah. This is from the article, Shelter in Place with God. A pastor friend told me that she was reading Psalm 91 every day during the corona crisis. I decided, I would join her. What the heck? That sounded good, Daily, as I've been reading and praying Psalm 91, I couldn't help but notice the use of the same word in almost every headline or government warning, shelter. Psalm 91:1 says, "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty." It caused me to, I'm kind of a research nerd, so it caused me to look up the meaning of the government's choice of the word shelter and variations on it. For example, shelter in place means obviously the simple thing that residents should stay inside except for essential business. In the Bible, like I said before, shelter is usually a comforting word, often a physical picture of God. Growing up, we were a tent camping family. Just the thought of an old school Coleman tent, it brings back great childhood memories for me. A few years ago, going through a difficult time, I discovered what I call today my tent verse, and it's from Psalm 61:4. Let me dwell in your tent forever. Let me take refuge in the shelter of your wings. As a person of faith, the choice of the word shelter by the world and by God was not lost on me. Might I dare say it even seemed kind of prophetic. It was weird to actually contemplate that word. So I want to give you one example from my world that I wrote about sheltering. It's called Blinded by Privilege. And I put this is in the article. During the start of the school closings, I was in my front yard with my granddaughters. I was watching them draw with sidewalk chalk, and a car I didn't recognize parked across the street. A young man stepped out of the car, then brought out a baby in a diaper bag. He went inside the house and shortly came back out and drove off without the baby. I thought, wait, that's not social distancing. Shame on you for bringing in a new person into my neighbor's home. Later that day, I read a tweet proposing that the terms shelter in place and social distancing are for the privileged. It implies that you can afford, first of all, to stay home. It infers the luxury of living in a house with only your family. It hit me hard. You are that blinded, privileged person. Many people, perhaps like my neighbor's friend, whose daycare probably closed, and yet he had to go to work, he was stuck in that dilemma. And yet my neighbor chose to be a safe shelter for one dad.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
putting it in perspective, isn't it?
It was so in perspective for me daily. Yeah. So I hope that's what I'm currently dealing with, my neighborhood, my granddaughters, trying to help with them, and writing, that's what I'm doing. So that's my answer to your first great question.
Cool. Very cool. So one of the other things that we're discussing in this series is basically, how God has helped us in challenging times in our past and how we might draw upon those experiences today. So would you like to share anything in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought about the biblical concept of remembering, an Ebenezer. I mean, to look back, that's not a bad thing for us to do. And like many people, this may be my first pandemic, but it's not my first hard time. You know, this is not our first time to go through something hard. And I thought one particular time that I remembered about that was difficult with your great question was about 10 years ago. I went through what I later learned was called the dark night of the soul. It was kind of I sort of laughed. It was a fancy term for me that one day God went silent, and that silence lasted for 3 years. It was excruciating. It was an excruciating hard time. I'm a person of a deep relationship with God, and it was excruciating, like nothing ever before in my life. During that time, one of the things that God used to help me was out of a bad thing is that I love to read. I love Christian authors. I suddenly couldn't read any of the things that I had read before. None of them, they only brought up shame. So I had to find new authors to read to find some hope. And it's uncanny how so many of the companions on the way are people that you are interviewing for this series. Really,
that's great.
I know, it's kind of strange and very comforting. So one of those, in fact, that I was looking at was Frederick Buechner. I had never heard of the man before, and a priest told me about him. And that's how you and I first connected, Brian, was me, because later on I started writing about the Dark Night, kind of towards the end. And I wanted to quote his book, which is a beloved book, Godric.
Yes, I remember this conversation.
So just, it was a God thing for me. And really that book was God to me when God was silent. And so that was a huge thing for me. Another one that I got to know during that dark night was Barbara Brown Taylor, who, there you are, you know her, you have her, interviewing her. And I wanted to read from her book to you, just to give your audience that may be feeling like this actually pandemic, they are feeling like God is silent to them. Where is God in this for them, in the horrible things that they could be going through? And so I wanted to read from her just for some hope.
This is from Learning to Walk in the Dark?
Yes, thank you. That's what I was going to hold it up. Yeah, such a beautiful, lovely cover. It's a piece of art. And I have read it many times. And so I want to read from her book the chapter that she actually has in the book called The Dark Night of the Soul. And I have to tell you, I read the book and I did not read that chapter for a long time. I was so afraid to read it because I knew it would make me cry. And so it's interesting that I read the whole book. But then I read, and I want to read this to you all, and just for some hope. If this is how you feel, if you feel a darkness in this time. She's referring to John of the Cross's reference to the dark night of the soul. But I think we could call it the dark virus if we wanted to.
There you go.
Yeah, this is a dark time. Yeah. So just think about this if this is how you're feeling. The dark night is God's best gift to us. That's a crazy thought, but there you go. It is intended for your liberation. It is about freeing you from your ideas about God, your fears about God, your attachments to all the benefits you have been promised for believing in God, your devotion to the spiritual practices that are supposed to make you feel closer to God, your dedication to doing and believing all the right things about God, your positive and negative evaluation of yourself as a believer in God, your tactics for manipulating God, and your sure cures for doubting God. All of these are substitutes for God. It's scary. John of the Cross says they all get in God's way.
That sounds so much like Barbara Brown Taylor, doesn't it?
Such an incredible writer. And I wanted to say, Brian, and that for the people that are listening to this, if before that you've gone through a dark night, or if this is bringing on a dark night for you, I want you to know, first of all, that you're not alone. I felt alone in that dark night. And if this virus is bringing on those feelings for you, you are not alone. That's what I learned. And I would love to connect with people that are struggling with that. On social media, I know, Brian, that you'll share my contact information. And I mean that. There were people who reached out to me that I will never forget. And so I want people to know that. And that's how I'm getting through this time, is remembering those times and the comfort. And I'm reading Barbara Brown Taylor again, and I'm reading Frederick Buechner again. Those are the comforting books for me, and the comforting fellow companions for me in this time.
Excellent. Well, I couldn't make any better suggestions, so.
I bet. Yeah, it's uncanny. Yeah.
So what other books or references or other things can you suggest for folks? And anything else you'd like to read too? I mean.
Yes, I would like to read. We authors, we like to read. We like to read our friends too. And I thought that's my favorite question, is what books are you reading? What books would you suggest? I often ask people, what are the books on your bedside table? I'm an old school person who likes paper books. And so I have stacks of books next to my bed. And so I often ask that question. So I love that you ask it of me. It's an interesting thing in this time of people talking about comfort food. I think that's a that you don't want to eat nutritional food. This is not the time to eat, that, but it's the time to eat what's comforting to you. My husband is a fabulous chef, and he's making every kind of version of bread known to man. And I am partaking of all of that bread. With lots of butter. And I thought that it's the same thing for me, at least, about reading. I am reading the things. In fact, I tried, like you were saying, tried to be productive and read some books that are stacked up on my desk, that I haven't read, that are new authors that I want to read. And I just found myself, it added to the trauma of adding to thoughts in my brain, because there's just so much daily coming in, that I had to return to what was comforting, like the comfort food. It was like the comfort of the writers that I know, that have brought me through the years, comfort. And so, yeah, and I was just thinking, to ask people, look on your shelf, go back to that shelf, that's the comfort writers, the ones that bring you comfort, whatever that is for you. Obviously, it's reading the Bible. It's reading Psalm 91, possibly. Daily, that's what I'm reading. So going back to what is comforting to you, what is the first book I remember that I reached for when it dawned on me that I couldn't read new things, was Eugene Peterson. I mean, he's just the ultimate pastor, the ultimate comfort. And his book is Along Obedience in the Same Direction. You can see it. It's dog-eared. It's literally been with me for so many years. It was a comfort in the dark night. So yeah, Eugene Peterson. I want to read from him as I just end our time together. I just want to read his words, that pastoral heart to us, was to me, and I want it to be for you to give you hope. And I just love the title that you're calling it, what gives us hope. So I'm going to read Eugene Peterson again, such a worder, such a wordsmith, person. He's just incredible. So it will make you smile, I hope, and will also give you hope. In Along Obedience in the Same Direction, his book. We are not scavenging in the dark alleys of the world, poking in its garbage cans for a bare subsistence. Only Eugene Peterson. We are traveling in the light towards God, who is rich in mercy and strong to save. It is Christ, not culture, that defines our lives. It is Christ, not culture, that defines our lives. It is the help we experience. It is the help we experience, not the hazards we risk, that shape our days. Yeah.
That's very good. That's he has this gift that I feel like Frederick Buechner has too, of being able to say really profound things very succinctly.
It's an enviable gift.
Yes, absolutely.
Very enviable as a writer. Yeah. If we could only do that. So yes, we miss him greatly, and yet we can be ministered and we can find hope in his words. So thank you so much for having me. Made my day to think about being with other writers and to be with you in a virtual time that we would have been together in person. At the Festival of Faith and Writing. So thank you, Brian.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Lisa. I'm so glad we were able to do this. And, as I've said to several other folks, if we were seeing each other in the exhibit hall at the Festival of Faith and Writing with, a gazillion other people coming in and out, we would not have been able to have this kind of an in-depth conversation. You wouldn't have those books there to be able to read from, so it's just funny how this forces some of this kind of interaction that's more deep and more meaningful, not superficial. That is, some of the time that we end up with. So anyway.
That's a good out of bad. Yeah, so good out of bad. Thank you, Brian. I look forward to watching more of them, and thank you for this ministry that you're doing for the world.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa, and best wishes in all that you're doing.
Yes, thank you. Take care.